Once upon a time, two ambitious young cousins named Pablo and Bruno lived side by side in a small Italian village. The young men were best buddies and big dreamers. They would talk endlessly about how someday, someway, they would become the richest men in the village. They were both bright and hard-working. All they needed was an opportunity. One day that opportunity arrived. The village decided to hire two men to carry water from a nearby river to a cistern in the town square. The job went to Pablo and Bruno. Each man grabbed 2 buckets and headed to the river. By the end of the day, they had filled the town cistern to the brim. The village elder paid them 1 penny for each bucket of water. "This is our dream come true," shouted Bruno. "I can't believe our good fortune." But Pablo wasn't so sure. His back ached and his hands were blistered from carrying the heavy buckets. He dreaded getting up and going to work the next morning. He vowed to think of a better way to get the water from the river to the village. "Bruno, I have a plan," Pablo said. "Instead of lugging buckets back and forth for pennies a day, let's build a pipeline from the village to the river." Bruno stopped dead in his tracks. "A pipeline? Who ever heard of such a thing?" Bruno shouted. "We've got a great job, Pablo. I can carry 100 buckets a day. At a penny a bucket, that's $1 a day. I'm rich. By the end of the week, I can buy a new pair of shoes. By the end of the month, a cow. By the end of 6 months, I can buy a new hut." "We have the best job in town. We have weekends off and 2 weeks paid vacation every year. We're set for life. Get out of here with your pipeline." But Pablo was not easily discouraged. He patiently explained the pipeline plan to his best friend. Pablo would work part of the day carrying buckets, and part of the day and weekends building his pipeline. He knew it would be hard work digging a ditch in the rocky soil. Because he was paid by the bucket, he knew his income would drop. He also knew it might take a year or 2 before his pipeline would pay off. But Pablo believed in his dream and he went to work. Bruno and the rest of the villagers began mocking Pablo, calling him Pablo the Pipeline Man. Bruno, who was earning almost twice the money as Pablo, flaunted his new purchases. He bought a donkey outfitted with a new leather saddle, which he kept parked outside his new 2-story hut. He bought flashy clothes and fancy meals at the inn. The villagers called him Mr. Bruno, and they cheered when he bought rounds at the tavern and laughed loudly at his jokes. While Bruno lay in his hammock on evenings and weekends, Pablo kept digging his pipeline. The first few months, Pablo didn't have much to show for his efforts. The work was hard, even harder than Bruno's, because Pablo was working evenings and weekends too. But Pablo kept reminding himself that tomorrow's dreams are built on today's sacrifices. Day by day he dug, inch by inch. Inches turned into 1 foot, then 10 feet, then 20, then 100. Short-term pain equals long-term gain, he reminded himself. "Keep your eyes on the prize," he kept thinking as he drifted off to sleep with the sounds of laughter from the village tavern in the background. Days turned into months. One day Pablo realized his pipeline was halfway finished, which meant he only had to walk half as far to fill his buckets. Pablo used the extra time to work on his pipeline. During his rest breaks, Pablo watched his old friend, Bruno, lug buckets. Bruno's shoulders were more stooped than ever. He was hunched in pain, his steps slowed by the daily grind. Bruno was angry and sullen, resenting the fact that he was doomed to carry buckets, day in, day out, for the rest of his life. He began to spend less time in his hammock and more time in the tavern. When the tavern's patrons saw Bruno coming, they'd whisper, "Here comes Bruno the Bucket Man," and they giggle when the town drunk mimicked Bruno's stooped posture and shuffling gait. Bruno didn't buy rounds or tell jokes anymore, preferring to sit alone in a dark corner surrounded by empty bottles. Finally Pablo's big day arrived. His pipeline was complete. The villagers crowded around as the water gushed from the pipeline into the village cistern. Now that the village had a steady supply of fresh water, people from around the countryside moved into the village and the village prospered. Once the pipeline was complete, Pablo didn't have to carry buckets anymore. The water flowed whether he worked or not. It flowed while he ate. It flowed while he slept. It flowed on weekends while he played. The more the water flowed into the village, the more money flowed into Pablo's pockets. Pablo the Pipeline Man became known as Pablo the Miracle Maker. There are lots of bucket carriers in the world that think they are doing just fine. But they can't stay in the free fall forever. Sooner or later they'll meet the ground. If you're like most people, you're working the bucket carrying plan. It's the time for money trap. The moral of the story is that we tend to trade time for money. When this happens, we are no longer able to work and trade time for money. We immediately need another source of income without us working. This is called passive income. Today's sacrifice could be tomorrow's success.